boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and be glad. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. Look to him and be radiant, so your faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him, and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and delivers them. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you that are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you that are full now, for you shall hunger. Woe to you that laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. But I say to you that hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your coat as well. Give to everyone who begs from you, and of him who takes away your goods, do not ask them again. And as you wish that men would do to you, do so to them.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Just going to get myself set up here. How is everyone doing this morning? Great. Awesome. Today, I'm doing the sermon a little bit different because this is probably going to be one of the most difficult sermons that I've ever done. And so I ask for much graciousness in the process of going through this sermon, but it's one that I've been thinking about for a long time because there's a lot of things in our society and how the world is operating that I as a pastor tasked by the church to speak about that are concerning to me. And so I wanted to share some of my thoughts about that today because I think that they are concerning to Christ as well. So, good morning. Have you ever had that one person that always seemed to find a way to rub you in the wrong way? At least one. Maybe you have known someone who always seemed to have it out for you. Maybe it was at work, maybe it was a neighbor, maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a friend. Or maybe you knew someone who it seemed as though their inherent nature was to always cause chaos and harm to others. How many of us have witnessed those people in our life too? Last week, we spoke about this idea of servant leadership. In the sermon, I spoke about how this message of servant leadership has been lost in much of the church in America for a long time. And when it is lost, we tend to, as a society, progress further into the future. We've come to a point where we are more or less self-sufficient. We don't really have need for much, especially up in a community like this. Most of us don't witness the poverty that may be around us on a day-to-day basis. I know sitting up here on the hill in this parsonage, which, by the way, thank you again. It's a beautiful house that Steph and I get to share in many wonderful memories in, and so we're very grateful to you. But being up here, we just don't see a lot of the pains of the world. And so when we get to a point where we're more or less self-sufficient, we oftentimes lose sight of this significance of what it means to do servant leadership as a Christ follower. We spoke about the fishermen, and the fishermen that followed Jesus into an uncertain future because they simply didn't know what was to come, and they left so much of their life behind with their families, and ultimately left their families to an uncertain future as well, and yet they still followed him because they believed so fully that this man, this Christ, would change the world for the better for themselves, their families, and the whole world. At the end of my sermon, I challenged all of us to not remain complacent and to find ways to talk about our faith with others. Maybe simply starting small little conversations about God around the dinner table, or asking each other questions about Scripture, just simply having God talk in our life, and then coming to church and seeking Christ together. And I know that is not a small task. Nor is it a small task, especially when we take into consideration what Lan so beautifully read for us this morning, and the words of Jesus Christ in loving our enemies. In our passage today, like Moses, Jesus comes down from this mountain and he speaks to the gathered people in a plain below and declares to them the covenant that is between them and God. Our passage today focuses on the command to love our enemies. It doesn't speak about loving each other, the people we like. It speaks about, and Jesus speaks about, loving our enemies. And in doing so, exposes our need for a righteousness that is given as a gift rather than the righteousness that we earn by our own obedience. Jesus encourages us to be loving, not just loving towards the people we like, but loving towards the people that we don't like. Even the people that may have hurt us or caused us harm or caused harm to others in our life that we care so much about. Jesus focuses on is probably on the Christian fellowship he's talking about this relationship in regards to the people that were following him or the Jewish faith at the time. But his words extend far beyond the Christian fellowship, the Christian community, to our extended family, our neighbors, our co-workers, and others, even strangers that we may not know. Of course, love is a bit kind of an airy word. We use it in a lot of different ways in our language, and so it doesn't really have a great definition for what Jesus is speaking about here. So a better word for using here might be something like compassion or care. Even so, the final two verses of the passage which was read for us this morning gives us those nuts and bolts of what love in Christ means. Love involves not judging people, not condemning people, but rather forgiving and being generous. So in these words, Jesus gives us an ethical guide for how the Christian life is supposed to be lived, but he's also done something else. The sermon that Jesus is offering to the people on this mount is not to serve simply as a recommendation of what might be best, but actually as a directive for how the church is supposed to live. It's God's command to us. If we were only showing basic respect to the people that we like, this world probably is not going to function well for very long. And I think that we can all agree that we see a lot of that in our society today, in the relationships of people who disagree with one another. All wars and struggles begin because groups of people or individuals cannot look beyond their own prejudices or their own hates. When we start thinking in an us and others, or an us versus them kind of mentality, we've already gone down a slippery slope towards pain and heartache. Not only are Jesus' words expected to be followed, but they're also intended to enrich our life because we know that pain and heartache only serves to make our lives worse. A commentary written by Earl Ellis states that Luke is saying the effect of Christian love in a person is in exact proportion to their practice of it. So in other words, that it means that the measure in which a believer receives God's grace is in direct proportion to their practice of graciousness towards others. So the nicer we are to others, the nicer they'll be to us. And the nicer they are to us, the nicer we'll want to be to them. It's pretty simple. Inevitably, the demand for such love serves to undermine any notion of self-righteousness. Who is there that can be merciful just as our Father or God is merciful? If the measure we use is the measure we get, then we're in trouble when we face judgment. We are in dire need of receiving gracious mercy from God that transcends our constant failure. And here is the failure of human nature. Especially Christians who rely on human nature, is when we choose not to listen to or reflect the witness of Jesus in the world. Acts of terrorism, acts of violence, acts of hatred are a direct attack and a violation of God's teachings through Jesus Christ. I think that's something we can all agree upon, right? That God does not want us to harm each other. God doesn't want anyone to harm anyone. As Christians, we're called to be a living example of Jesus' teachings in the world, and our response to such actions is extremely important to get right. The past couple of years, we've seen a huge increase in a lot of the visceral political hatred from both sides. I think we can all agree about that. A lot of what I see many of you post on Facebook is around that very frustration. To the point that it has become honestly disgusting. And I think we can all agree about that too. It has bled into the life of the church, and I see that on the larger church level more so than on the local church level. And it has become a virus that we as Christians must rely upon the healer of our brokenness, Jesus Christ, to fix. Whether it be the rhetoric that we see on TV from either of the parties that work for us, that we pay to work for us, we know that it is wrong and that it's not in line with Jesus' teachings. But for whatever reason, our society continues to say that this is normal and it is fine, even when we know that it is not. This kind of rhetoric that pits one group against another has resulted in many things happening over the last couple of years that all of them break my heart. The first one that we saw that was pretty blatant was the gentleman coming down into Northern Virginia and shooting at a bunch of Republican congressmen and almost killing one of them. And this is a result of disgusting rhetoric. The next one that we saw was recently, where Democratic contributors and former presidents and news agencies with more liberal leanings had bombs that were delivered to their doorsteps. Or maybe we think about this man who had anti-Semitic beliefs who attacked a synagogue in Pittsburgh yesterday because he believed that the Jewish community in America was helping the migrants that are moving north, another group that this gentleman also has racist views towards. And then the other one that I thought about this week was this guy named Sean Christie. How many of us remember him? It wasn't too long ago. He was this gentleman that threatened the president's life and then ended up camping out in the woods for 40-some days, or even longer, and was just recently arrested. This is the kind of world that we as people of this nation are allowing to unfold before us, and there has been a corruption of the great movement that we allow for as Christians, especially when we allow for those who claim Christ to continue to act in such a way. I believe that Jesus cries when we become okay with religious leaders saying things like, it's okay for the death of one individual to occur because we have a lot of money at stake, and if we took a stand, we'd probably lose that money. I believe that Jesus cries when we choose to vilify one another for our own beliefs because we don't agree with each other. I believe that Jesus cries when Christians choose to remain silent, when those chosen to represent us do things that are counter to our own convictions and we say nothing. Because to do nothing and to say nothing is in and of itself an action. And our statement should be this, that Jesus is for everyone. There is no one in this country that's not welcome to come to this church. Because Jesus is for everyone.
Amen.
We as Christians allow for ourselves or others to peddle in nonsense that makes Jesus cry out in pain. What good are we doing if we allow for that? The Christian life is not one without heartache or trial. We're not going to be able to skip over the conflicts of life because they're there. But as Christians, we also know that there is a happy ending to this story too. Or we believe and claim that there is. We live in an age where you never know when someone might spoil a book or a movie that you're looking forward to see. We call these things spoilers. Or that people might spoil the life that we are living today. But Jesus is calling us to live a life that is worthy of the gospel that we hold to be true. Think about this. If you were to go to a restaurant today, and you fill up on bread and you fill up on chips before your meal arrives, and then you've lost your appetite. You spoiled your appetite for the far better food that you could be receiving if you just hadn't have indulged yourself on all the bad stuff that wasn't, or the stuff that just wasn't as good as what you were going to get. As Christians, we're called to sacrifice now for God's glory so that we can fully experience that same glory later. Jesus tells this parable about a rich young fool. to illustrate the futility in trying to control our own blessings here on earth. We see this in Luke 12. Instead, what we must do is to follow the guidelines that were sketched out by Christ in this Sermon on the Mount, these Beatitudes. We sacrifice, we love, and experience grief for the cause of Christ, and eventually we will find that all of it was worth it in the end. The law of Scripture serves to remind us of our own unworthiness. In reality, we cannot love as Christ demands. If gaining God's forgiveness depends on our ability to forgive others, well, we know we're all going to be in trouble. Luckily for us, this is not the case. With our sin before us, we are reminded that our standing before God is not dependent on our own limited abilities to be obedient, but rather on Christ's ability to be perfectly obedient. The best that we can do is seek out this Nazarene and find mercy in the one who has the capacity to forgive unboundedly. The biblical law also serves us to give direction for our Christian life, a direction motivated and shaped by the indwelling, compelling Spirit of Christ in our hearts. The law reminds us to be what we are, so that Jesus' exhortation about unreasonable compassion, or more particularly forgiveness, sets before us a quality of discipleship well beyond the norm. Although we can never reach such an ideal in practicality, the power of the indwelling Christ can certainly press us towards that goal. Friends, we have this little thing called the midterm elections coming up. And I want to encourage you to go out and vote for who you feel is best. But I also want us to encourage each other to love each other, even if we don't vote for the same person. Even if we don't like what the other person professes to be true. Not because we have to agree, but because we can love alike, just as Christ has loved us. If we can do that, I think that we can start to change our culture a little bit, that we can start to move us towards a more compassionate and loving culture that doesn't rely upon our own personal beliefs and instead relies upon our own connection as one people. We are called to not stand by and watch as the world tears at one another, but to speak truth to power. And there's one truth. Our truth is Jesus Christ, the Savior of souls and the hope of the world. Christian author Rachel Held Evans says this: "We long for our churches to be a safe place to doubt, to ask questions and to tell truth even if it's uncomfortable for us. Our physical churches are the space that allow for us to for our iron to sharpen each other's iron. If we truly wish to follow Christ, if we truly wish to be as Christian as we can possibly be, we must stand for truth even when it goes against our own beliefs or the beliefs of whatever group we espouse to be true. We must stand for justice and peace most of all, even if it seems irrational and silly. The life and ministry of Jesus in this world is our responsibility because Christ asked us to. Let us go forth and do what is just, what is right, and what is worthy of the gospel that we proclaim, and hold each other and ourselves accountable, and those who speak about Christian perspectives to a standard that we know would be worthy of the gospel message that we claim. Amen.